Ecology Brazil Congress. We are particularly pleased to introduce Dr. Richard Forman. Summarizing Dr. Forman's contributions to the field of landscape and road ecology is close to impossible, but we can easily say that he literally wrote the book on the subject. Beginning with his 1986 book, Landscape Ecology, through the publication of Road Ecology in 2003, Dr. Forman has consistently been one of the preeminent and pioneering forces for the integration of the study of ecological patterns with human modifications of the environment. Dr. Forman is currently the PAES Professor of Landscape Ecology at Harvard University, a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of the Sciences, the author of dozens and dozens of key papers critically important to this field, and at least 8 books with a 9th on the way. We are enormously pleased to have Dr. Forman here to give the opening plenary today. E agora, vou conversar em português. Abrindo as atividades do primeiro Congresso Brasileiro de Ecologia das Estradas, temos o grande prazer de apresentar o Dr. Richard Forman. Resumir as contribuições de Dr. Forman no contexto de ecologia da paisagem e ecologia de estradas é quase impossível, mas podemos afirmar, pelo menos, que ele literalmente escreveu os livros sobre esses temas. Começando em 86, com o livro Landscape Ecology, e chegando à publicação de Road Ecology em 2003, Dr. Forman tem sido uma força proeminente e pioneira na integração dos estudos de padrões ecológicos com alterações humanas do ambiente. Dr. Forman atualmente é o PAESC, professor de Ecologia da Paisagem na Universidade de Harvard, nos Estados Unidos, um fellow da Associação Americana pelo Advancimento das Ciências, é autor de um grande número de significativas publicações em ecologia de estradas, pelo menos 8 livros, com 9 em caminho. Nós temos o enorme prazer de ter Dr. Forman aqui para realizar a conferência de abertura do Road Ecology Brasil 2010. Dr. Forman.
Please excuse me for speaking English. I can speak some Spanish and some French, but I'm illiterate in Portuguese. It is an extreme honor to be here at this meeting and to be with our distinguished leaders that you just heard from, and to have been invited by Professor Alex Badger, who invited me to Brazil. There's no country I would rather come to for this subject than Brazil. And this is a great opportunity, a great pioneering event. And I hope that it is the catalyst, the stimulus for great discoveries ahead and practices and policies. I do want to say that when I was young, I'm still young. When I was young, I used to play semi-professional football, and Pele was my inspiration. And then later, I had one opportunity to see Pele play, and he was fantastic. He scored 2 goals, and I still remember that Pele could see all the way around him. He had vision 360 degrees, and that's why he was so successful, maybe. So what I would like to do today is to talk about road ecology, and I will have many ideas here, and I will express them briefly, so that hopefully everybody here finds some ideas that are useful and interesting. So with that, let's start. Maybe. Magic. No, go to the next one. So I'd like to start with some discussion about wildlife and safe passages, which I think is of interest here. And then some traffic, the vehicles, the road size, a little bit on stormwater perhaps, and then broaden to the whole network of the landscape and region, and perhaps at the end a few things on transportation planning. Okay. In the broadest sense, road ecology as an area of knowledge, an area of discovery, area of study, its application for society, for the people, for government. It seems to me there are two very broad goals or objectives. The first one is to simply improve the environment, the natural environment near every road segment in the network. And in different places it will be different solutions, that's fine. But just to improve it a little bit. And the second big goal then is the road network crosses the whole landscape. When you go in an airplane, you see the network and the landscape. And to integrate the road system, or road network, with both nature and water. And so I've called it integrated with a sustainable emerald network. That is the large green patches on the land that are connected, and also with near natural water conditions. And that's a big challenge. That's a very difficult one, and it requires looking to the future and thinking not just about this little road, but thinking about the network and the landscape. Here's an example from some work I've done in Barcelona, in España. The city of Barcelona. Is it on the top? No problem, no problem. I can wave my hands. Barcelona is a city down at the bottom, and those are big green areas, conservation areas and parks. And they're connected then, their proposal is to connect them with corridors of various sorts and to make an emerald network. Now, of course, the road network goes through that. And so the big challenge is, how can we make the road network consistent with the big green network or emerald network? So now let me switch to wildlife and animals and crossings and passages. And these are sort of the four basic ways that a road, a single road, will affect wildlife. It would be nice to have this work. Can you show me? You can see the first is, oh, perfecto. Habitat loss is simply the area where the road was built, and also the roadside. So that's obvious. You lose some habitat when you build a road. The second is the reduced habitat quality, and that means that the opening of the road has an influence on the surrounding forest or grassland or whatever it is that extends out on both sides. I was in maybe 3-4 days ago looking at El Arco near Rio de Janeiro. The highway that's now being built is an arco around, and there's one little place where the road had been just cut in 2 weeks through a forest, and so there was habitat loss for a rare species animal. And the question was, is it just the width of the road and roadside? And it's not. It's a wide zone extending into the forest on both sides where there's a habitat degradation, habitat quality loss. And then wildlife mortality is simply the killing of animals by the vehicles, and I'll talk about that briefly. And then the question of the barrier effect, or reduced habitat connectivity. In other words, the road is a barrier, or a filter, really. It's usually a filter. And so those are the four things. And the reason I like this little diagram is, notice on the vertical axis is wildlife population size, and before the road is built, the population is varying over time, like this. After the road is built, and those four processes have taken place, the population is smaller, and we know from various ecological studies that a smaller population fluctuates more in population size. It's a bigger fluctuation, as you can see there. And the problem is, then, small population, big fluctuations, that the population may become zero. It will disappear, and local extinction. So there's an overview then of the effects on animal populations, particularly. Yes. Dos momentos. ¿Y la próxima? That is the vehicles that, yeah. What did you do? Yeah, this is a California book on flattened fauna. That means the animals that are flattened, and there are two examples there, animals flattened. Overall, the ecological effect of road mortality is minimal in general. And the reason is that the animals can make babies faster than the cars can hit them. So that, and that's true for most animals, but there's some animals that that's not true for. And here's an example of a bear, and the animals where road mortality is really important are the animals that reproduce slowly. They can't make babies fast. They reproduce slowly, like bears and big cats and wolves and things like that. This is a picture I took in China. No, this is a picture from China. I was in China 2 months ago with the Ministry of Transport and the Chinese Academy of Transportation Sciences. And I like this for two reasons. That one, first of all, the road is very narrow. It's a 4-lane road, but they have a narrow strip in the middle, so the total habitat loss is less. So that's one good thing for the animals. And the second is interesting because here's a barrier going across, the road barrier, and there's a guard rail on both sides. It's a very strong one, which the transportation people know. The 3 ridged barriers are very strong, and they're connected, and they're about 1 meter or 2 meters apart. And they plant shrubs down the middle, always, for 10s and 20, 50 kilometers. of shrubs down the middle. And then the shrubs grow up to about 2 meters or 2.5 meters. They have a machine that comes along and cuts off the tops of the shrubs, so that you always have a strip of shrubs that in the middle is protected and it's strong guardrails, and then it's easier for the animals to get across. A very nice design, I think. Okay, now it looks a little complicated, but I know there are lots of good scientists in the room and you love graphs. So what I've got down here is the number of vehicles per day that cross a road. Most of these data come from Europe. Number of vehicles that cross it today. So here's 2,500 vehicles. And the first thing to look at is this curve right here. This is roadkill. And you'll notice that if you increase the traffic, very low traffic numbers, roadkill increases, and you keep increasing, and then it decreases. And roadkill is very low later, more traffic. Notice this curve. This is the curve of species that come to the road and don't try to cross, but instead they're repelled and they go back. They don't try to cross because of the traffic and the noise, and it's dangerous. And you'll notice then that when there's little traffic, almost all of them try to cross. And then when there's a lot of traffic, most of them, 90%, then come to the road, a lot of traffic, go back. It's dangerous, noisy. And the result is this curve right here, the success rate of getting across. And you'll notice that when the traffic level is in this range here, the success rate drops very, very low. It's not zero, but it's very low. So what's happening then with a lot of traffic is you're increasingly repelling the animals from crossing. And some of our work up here, maybe I'll show you later. Suppose you were driving along an expressway like this, and you saw that, and you could read, and you were in Holland, and you could read Dutch, and that says wildlife crossing there. And I have been on top of that with the reporter from Radio Amsterdam, and this is 80 meters wide, 80 meters wide, and on each side there's a 2-meter high berm, soil berm. That is, it's soil like this high, and on top of that are shrubs and small trees planted up there. And so when you're on top, it's very quiet. No noise. And at nighttime, I have not been on nighttime, they tell me it's very dark. The lights don't come up there. And when I was up there, this was many years ago, and I said, oh, this 80 meters wide, it's big enough for football. Play football, it's a grassland. And the man from Radio Amsterdam said, well, it's good enough for the Dutch team, but not good enough for the American team. So I said, whoa, why is that? And so he turned his thing off, and he said, well, you know, the Dutch are pretty good at soccer. I should not say that, but the Dutch are pretty good. He said, but the Americans, when they play soccer, they're like a group of sheep. Because if the ball goes over there, they all go after the ball. If the ball goes over, they all go after the ball. So the Americans need a bigger field to play on. Anyway, this is very expensive. This is big, massive, and it comes a little bit out of some legal restrictions in Europe that makes them do this. But when the rain comes on that, at the bottom of it, there's a gravel and sand and a drainage pipe system. So the water from the rain drains to each end like this, and there's a little wetland, a little pond or wetland at both ends. And that attracts the animals to come to the edge of the crossing. So the animals then cross between, there's a national park on one side and national forest on the other side. Here's a diagram of one in France. You notice it's the hourglass shaped. It's quite nice because you can see visually from down here across to there, from here over to there. The next one. This is in Florida, in the United States, one of my students, and this was designed for Florida panther, pantera, big cat, and also for bears. And it works. In fact, right near his foot, there's a big imprint of the Florida panther that went through here. This is very cheap. This is a box culvert. It's manufactured elsewhere, and it's brought on a truck and just dropped into place. The inside dimension is 2.5 meters, and it is about 7 to 8 meters wide this way, almost 8 meters, a little bit less, 7.5. And this is another, a bigger one in Florida, and this is our Florida panther, the pantera. You notice the radial collar on it. Here's an alligator. I must tell you that this is a collage. A collage. These are two photographs, different photographs. So those animals are not visiting each other there. But they built these overpasses, underpasses, 24 of them and more. And they did it for two reasons. The first reason was to get surface water to flow into a big national park, the Everglades National Park in southern Florida. And the second reason was to protect that big cat. And the population was in big trouble. And the results of those projects were three things. First, they reduced the mortality of those cats from, they reduced it by 40%. And the second was that they increased the water that went to the wetland, the park. And the third was the entire fauna, all the animals used these crossings. They did not expect that, but all the animals that were present used that. Here's some typical diagrams. This is a barrier in the center of the road. This is a Dutch example of water flow in a culvert with wildlife pathways. I think Miriam Gosson will talk to you about this tomorrow. And here's this wildlife thing with a wetland there. And there are many, many designs that have been developed in Australia and Europe, North America, and maybe in Brazil. This is a Dutch study, or at least European study, the same thing. I think we'll hear more about this tomorrow, the next one. So, one of the questions is if you are going to provide crossings under or over the road for wildlife, where do you put them? This is a Czech study in the Czech Republic. And the usual way to decide where to put them is, where are the animals crossing now, or where are the animals hitting vehicles now? And then you put it there. And I think that's not the right way to do it. I think that's not the right answer. Rather, if you think back to the earlier image I showed you, and I said, what we need to do is to think of a broad, connected area of large patches. I call it an emerald network. And think that's for the future, that will be there 30 years and 50 years and more in the future. And map that, and then put your crossings for wildlife to make those big patches connected. And in many cases, it will not be where animals are killed today, I will explain that, but it will not be today's pattern, but think about tomorrow's pattern. Think about the pattern of crossings that make sense, that can be sustained for the future. That's the place to put the crossing structures, the underpasses, overpasses. This is simply from across Europe, the different countries in Europe, and all this says, I know I'm a scientist, and I put things like that, it's not interesting. This just simply says that many European countries have underpasses and overpasses. Some don't have many, but many exist, and some work well, and some don't. Now, let me switch now to traffic volume. So far, I've talked about the road, the animals, and solutions for that. Now, let's talk about traffic volume, or traffic density, maybe in Brazil. Do you use traffic density? Or traffic intensity? Traffic volume, okay. And this is a broad model, of course. And the idea is that if you double the number of vehicles per day, from A to B, you double it, that the effect, the road effect zone, that is the width of effects out on both sides from the road, it doesn't double, it increases less, so you get a curvilinear response like this. So as you increase volume, initially, the width of the zone that's degraded by the traffic increases sharply, but gradually it doesn't increase so much. Next. And so we've done some studies on this. These are 4 different roads in a similar area near Boston. A small collector road with maybe 5,000 vehicles per day, a bigger, still bigger, and then more than 30,000 vehicles per day. And we studied birds of conservation interest, grassland birds of conservation interest. And so this map, the dots are all the places where the birds could be, and the letters are where they are. And the thickness of the line is proportional to traffic volume. So that the thicker lines have more than 30,000 vehicles per day. And I'll show you the results of this. These are the results. There's one good thing here, and there are 2 bad things here. The good thing is that if you have only about 5,000 vehicles per day, then there's no significant effect on either the regular breeding or the occasional presence of these grassland birds of conservation importance. No effect. So with small amount of traffic per day, that's good, that we don't see an effect. The first bad thing is, though, if we have about 10 or 12,000 vehicles per day, there's no effect on the occasional presence, but there's significant reduction in the regular breeding of birds, that is the regular nesting and making babies. And this zone extends for 400 meters on both sides of the road. In fact, there was 0 in our study. There were no regular breeding cases within 400 meters on both sides of the road when you have about 10 to 12,000 vehicles per day. That's bad news, because that's a wide zone. And it continues, and the other bad news is when you have a big multi-lane expressway with more than 30,000 vehicles, there's a significant effect out to 1,200 meters on both sides. So in a big highway with a lot of traffic, and the traffic is the important thing, the more traffic, then there's a zone of degraded habitat for more than 1 kilometer in this direction and also in that direction. So if you want a nature reserve, then don't put it near a busy highway or a future busy highway with more traffic. And there's one other set of data from Europe that agrees very closely with this. This is interesting. I'm sorry you can't read this. This is from Reichman's work recently. And this, on the vertical axis, it's amount of traffic. It's the same thing. Amount of traffic up to 50,000 vehicles per day. On the vertical axis, it's the percent of the species, and these are birds, I think. I think these are birds. The percent of the bird species which are affected by the traffic. And it increases with low traffic, it increases to about 50%. About half of the bird species are affected by the amount, or correlated with the amount of traffic. And almost all of those are negatively affected. So almost 50% of the avifauna, that is the bird species present, are negatively affected by the traffic. And let me say at this point, we don't know for sure what the traffic effect is, but all of us agree that almost certainly it is traffic noise. Traffic noise is the thing. It's not the visual, it's not pollution, and then there's some other hypotheses, but the main hypothesis, we all agree, is traffic noise, and there's increasing indirect evidence of that. Like birds that change the frequency, that change the pitch, change, what do you call it, pitch? Change the tone, okay, what is it? Okay. Anyway, the birds near the busy road will sing, the same species will sing at a different pitch. And then farther out, they'll sing at a different pitch. Okay, thanks. And the big cause of traffic noise has to do with the tire and the road. That is, there is some aerodynamic noise, and there is some, the machine, the motor and the powertrain makes noise. But the biggest noise, this is in decibels, the biggest noise is the tire, and it's actually the tire and the surface of the road. And both the tire design and the design of the surface of the road can be made quieter. I have good transportation publications, and other people do too, that you can make tires quieter and you can make road surfaces quieter. There's some trade-offs there. Yes, we need new thinking. Some children made this, and I thought this was nice. I think it's from Germany. We need new thinking. That's what this says. Thanks. This is in China 2 months ago, and I just want to show you a big road like this, and a small road over here, another small road. And they use trees and they use shrubs a lot. They're planting enormous amounts of trees and shrubs along all the roads that I saw. And here's an example. They're making it also pretty, beautiful. Here with flowers here, shrubs here, and then the trees above. Very, very typical. Not just outside the cities, but and not this is near the cities here, but this and this are out in the rural areas. They're massive plantings. Next one. Roadsides and non-native species are of great interest to some people. The next one. And this is a study from New Zealand, where New Zealand is very concerned with non-native species. And here's the road, here's the ditch, and there's the vegetation beyond it. This is a very large study with a lot of data. And there's some interesting patterns that come out of this. The first is that the total number of non-native species, plant species here, is constant as you go from the road shoulder out here. So the non-native species are abundant and the same number all the way across. The second thing that's interesting, the number of native species are few here, but they increase until they are 50% of the total, or at least they're equal to this. There, not 50%, they're equal to this. So the non-native species are doing well here and not doing well here. The third thing that's interesting here is that there are some rare native species. That is what we might call endangered, rare, threatened species in roadsides. And there's no state or country in the world that has mapped them, as far as I know. that every manager or roadside manager will tell me, oh yes, we take care of them. But nobody has mapped them and nobody really knows where they are. But they are present. And the final thing is, notice there's also some rare non-native species. That is, a non-native species with one individual or two clones. And notice the interesting thing there is, if you were interested in not stopping this spread of non-native species, the invasion, then maybe this would be a good thing to do. Go and find those and get rid of them, eliminate them. That might be a very effective way to reduce the spread of non-native species, if you're interested in that. Okay, now this gets into driving. I suppose in Brazil everybody drives, is that right? Everybody in Brazil drives. Maybe. Anyway, suppose you were driving, this is in the Rocky Mountains, in Wyoming. Suppose you were driving along this road. You were driving, you would probably go slowly, wouldn't you? You would drive slowly. And the reason you would drive slowly is because of this vegetation is right next to the road, and this vegetation is right next to the road. So it turns out that there is a literature, and it's a very interesting literature. It comes from psychologists, it comes from landscape architects, from ecologists, from engineers, and the literature says, the next one I think, the literature says that on average, drivers drive more slowly on narrow two-lane highways than on wide two-lane highways. Okay, so that road you drive slowly. If it's wide open, you drive faster. All right? And then down here, drivers on narrow highways drive further from the road edge. They stay in their traffic lane, but they're closer to the center line, so they're kind of over here a little bit, like that. And there's actually a very interesting literature. It's not a large literature. I found about 20 or 25 papers. And the idea is that you drive more slowly if the perceived width of the road ahead is narrow. It's not the actual width. It's the perceived width. You perceive, I perceive that ahead it's narrow, therefore I slow down. So if you are interested in, let's see what the next is. If you are interested in animal vehicle crashes, for example, big animals crashing into a car, you might be interested. Transportation people are very interested. Or even road kills. Well, this is a study mainly based on moose vehicle crashes. Moose is a big animal. Alces, big animal. And most of these data come from two-lane highways in Sweden, extensive data set. What's interesting, this is the posted speed limit. This is what the sign says, how fast you should go. This is presumably the safe speed limit. And what you notice, and this is the moose vehicle crashes per 100 kilometers per year, a very large data set. If you look at the black histograms, very few crashes, up to 70, and very large number of crashes here and also here. So there's kind of an indication of a threshold there at about 80 kilometers per hour. Do you use kilometers or miles? Kilometers. 80 kilometers per mile. And so if you can slow people down, to 80 kilometers per hour on two-lane highways, you'll have very few crashes like that. Now think about the previous slides about the perceived width ahead. If you could narrow the perceived width with vegetation, you could slow people down, not everywhere, not on a superhighway, but in parks and some rural areas, especially, for example, in entering a village or entering a town. You could slow them down, and also you could reduce this and road kills. So here's sort of a summary, some of the values of having woody vegetation in the roadsides. In my country, the goal on highways is to have a big, wide area out there, open. And And it actually, if and they say for safety, but in many places, if you could make it narrow, you could slow people down and have fewer crashes and fewer animal crashes. So I will there and some other values there. I have a student right now, in fact we're giving a paper on this next month, on using your roadsides for agriculture, for growing crops, so you have productive roadsides, that's what we call it, productive roadsides, especially outside of cities, where the transportation costs are minimal for producing food products and fodder and carbon sequestration and many other things we're doing there, and it's close to the city so that the products can be taken into the city. Oh yes, I should say something about water. Sometimes there's too much water and there's a flood. You see all these are all fish waiting to get across the road there. Those are salmon in the Pacific Northwest. They want to get across quickly after the flood. And I think I won't do this one, but the idea is here is that rain comes down, and the more impermeable surface you have, then the higher the runoff and flood level, the peak flow we call it, and the flood level, and also streams dry out because the water is transported horizontally, and instead of percolating into the streams and supporting the vegetation. The next one. This is in China 2 months ago, and this is along a big expressway, a new expressway, and this is a rest stop, a rest area next where you stop when you're driving long distance. And I was with the landscape architect who designed this, and back here is where the trucks park, the lorries park here, and this is where the cars park here. And so one car parks here, another car parks here, another car parks there. And so what they're doing, not only aesthetically is it better, they think, but also it's reducing the runoff and having more water percolate down into the groundwater. Now, here's a test. You know, I'm a professor. We're at a university, famous university. Everybody tell me by pointing, which way is the front of that car? That's a very familiar object. It's a car. Every one of you sees cars every day. And everybody point, which way is the front of that vehicle? Come on, everybody. Everybody. Back there, come on. Which way is the front? This way or that? Everybody. Hey, you aren't doing. That's very familiar. You see cars all the time. Right. Those of you that pointed this way are right. That's right. And look, that's a very familiar object. It's just you never see that from that angle. And that car then produces lots of things. And these are various pollutants listed along here. And what I've got here are actually pollutants, and there's the pollutants: nickel, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, etc. And everything to the left of this line is caused by the road and roadside activities. And everything to the right of this line is caused by vehicles and vehicle use. And so you can see the various causes. And the purpose of here was to find one thing that we could do to reduce pollution, reduce stormwater pollution. And what this graph shows, this histogram shows, is there isn't any one thing. You can't do it. You could stop using fuel, use electric cars, but that would help there, but it wouldn't help these others. And so when you have a problem like that, there are only two solutions maybe. One solution is to have less of the pollutants from the beginning. So you build your cars so they can't make so much like that. So that's an automobile construction issue. Mercedes-Benz, for example, is very interested in that issue. The other solution is what we do in stormwater management. We try to retain stormwater from transportation. We try and retain it so that it doesn't disperse too far into all our water bodies. And we retain it in little depressions of different kinds in order to treat it or accumulate it or filter it, or the various ways of doing it. And so that's the problem there. It's a big problem. And our water bodies, our streams, our rivers, our ponds, our lakes, are significantly affected by these things coming from us, our transportation. And up to a point, this is related to traffic volume, but it's not completely related to traffic volume, as you can imagine here. And so when water runs off the road, here are some examples of there's a ditch, and there's a little shallow area there. There's different designs, and you can think of various designs, partly to hold the water from runoff so it doesn't get into a lake or a stream and pollute it, partly to provide some biodiversity in the roadsides there, and those are the two main reasons we do it. I should say that, remember, if you have an open roadside and you have rain that comes and runs into that road ditch, then the sun heats it up, and so the water gets hot, warm. And then that ditch goes into a stream or a river, and what you're doing is putting warm water or hot water into the stream or river, which is not good for some fish and other species there. So ditches, if you can hold the water and not put hot water into the stream, that's a good thing too. Yes, there's a ditch. This is in China. Next. Okay, now let me broaden out to the road network and the whole landscape. So these are road networks with high road density and low road density here. And these just illustrate a lot of ways that road density it may be important. We can correlate many things with road density. And road density is measured as the total number of kilometers per unit area. So if you took an average kilometer squared, how many linear kilometers of road is there in that? And that's road density. And you can see human access, fire, many things are correlated with road density. It turns out that road density is a good way to start. You can get Landsat images, you go on Google Earth or wherever you have, and you can calculate road density very easy. I think what I've seen is that road density is a good way to start, but it only gives you maybe 10 or 20% of the variability of patterns. That is, it's a way to start, but you need to get beyond it. And I think more important, the next step is what I think of as network form. What is the optimum form of a road system, of a road network? And interestingly, we don't know. There's very little literature. Anybody in here could take that topic and write a thesis on it and really push the envelope, give us some good new insights. So this is what my students call a Formanism, a Formanismo. And so the idea is that a grid is not very good ecologically. Now actually I can't cite much evidence for that. But no species evolved with a grid, a perfect grid. So no species evolved with it, and we can describe many landscape ecology spatial patterns which are not grid that species do like, so to speak. And so we just say it's bad. I can't prove that, but I think there's a lot of indirect evidence. So so here's our road density, and here's the same road density, but what we've done is we've concentrated most of the road density down in one corner. So that's good. Yeah, good. Same road density, and so now you have 3 big forest patches here, for example, and with roads going here. And it turns out that it's still better if you reduce the road density, but you provide for the same total traffic, amount of traffic. So these two provide the same amount of traffic flow. So if you want to get 50,000 vehicles per day across the landscape, those both do the same. And we have a lot of good evidence that there's much less environmental impact if you concentrate concentrate traffic on larger roads than have that same amount of traffic dispersed on smaller roads. And that's what this is doing. It's saying fewer large roads cause much less environmental damage than many small roads. And there's nice data from Germany and other places. And then still better is to have some of those wildlife underpasses and overpasses which connect these large patches here. And I'll have to tell you that right now I'm working on a really futuristic article for the future of road systems that will actually help nature and actually help energy and recreation and food production, other things. Working with an automotive engineer, and we have a very futuristic article which will get us a still better option out here. But I'm not going to talk about that because it's too avant-garde. This is in Germany, over an area of Germany over 1 century. So it's going for 100 years. And these are little villages here with the roads that connect them. And here the village is 1900. And then here, and coming up here. And what you see is that the villages turned into towns. They turned into population growth. And they also, there's some strip development or ribbon development happen here. And some villages are connected. And notice that there's not so much change on this side. Most of the change on this side. And the reason is that here, they built, about here, before this, well, here, they built a major highway. They built an expressway down this side. And so the expressway stimulated growth. Some Amazon roads stimulate growth. Roads all around the world stimulate growth. And so huge growth happened over here. So if you want to stimulate growth, then build a new road. There you are. It's a simple. No, it's not simple. But notice then that if this is your landscape and you were trying to protect large wild animals, for example, then the only places left maybe are over here and over here on this left side here. That is, nature would be better protected there. So if you want to have growth here or you want to have growth here, then add a highway. Yeah, suppose you were driving along a road and you saw this. This is in Catalunya, España. And you said, oh, that's very nice. It's very nice. The sheep are grazing and everything. And then you look more carefully and look at the sheep right here. Those sheep are all plastic. Those are all plastic sheep. And that's a design thing. So you have to watch out. You have to watch out for Forman, because Forman will do things that you don't know. Let me skip this. Okay, next one. Next. No. Okay. What I skipped was the idea of metapopulation dynamics. And some of you who know what that means can immediately realize that road networks are very important in metapopulation dynamics. And those of you who don't know about that, we humans are fragmenting the land all the time. And we are creating metapopulations. We are making metapopulations everywhere. So we better understand then the idea of metapopulation. The governor of Minas Gerais should understand about metapopulations. You must teach. So here is this is a little paper we did some years ago. And the idea was, where is the best place for a road and where is the worst place for a road? If you're going to build a road, where's the best place and where's the worst place? That was the question. And so I'll just simplify by saying, here's a large natural patch of forest, for example. Here's that's the matrix. Here's a large patch there. Here's a small patch. Here's some corridors, hedgerow, stream, so on. And so for this, and we're interested with our essay is habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, habitat degradation, alteration, and fragmentation or connectivity. And so we add a road here, we add a road, we add a road, and it turns out the worst place to put the road is right here, to go through, to bisect or dissect the large patch. Of all the options, that's the worst. And the next worst is actually perhaps right here, although there's some other problems over here. And the same idea, if you do a network, a road network with the same design, the worst is right here, and the next worst is right here. So do anything you can to try not to dissect or bisect a large natural patch. I think that's the bottom line there. Back to China. I'm sorry, Brazil is where I wanted to really come, but the Chinese invited me, and China is building an expressway system just overnight, all across the country right now. China and India and Eastern Europe. And so I had to go to China. So this is a highway that's avoiding a wetland. This is a big wetland right here. It goes off in that direction. And so they raised the highway, and you'll notice it's a big highway. It's a wide highway, in order to permit the hydrology and the wetland species to go. And let's go to the next one there. Actually, go back for 1 minute. These are different ways of changing the world. Yes, these are generic spatial patterns for change. So you can perforate, you can incise like this, you can dissect. I was just talking about dissection or bisection. You can fragment, like taking a plate, dropping it into pieces. You can shrink, get smaller, and you can eliminate it or disappear. And I just want to show you this one right here. The idea of a road that goes into a park, for example. And that probably, if you had to eliminate any road and have the biggest environmental benefit, if you could eliminate that road right there, you would probably, per kilometer, you would have the best gain, the best advantage to people. And the main reason is it provides human access and hence human degradation to that large green area. So if you were, I met somebody here who knows a woman in Montana who works with a sort of a progressive radical organization that's trying to eliminate roads. This woman is actually working to eliminate roads. I mean, she's really something. And so per kilometer length, if you wanted to have the biggest impact, there's your biggest impact. And this is in Redwood National Park in California, where there are big redwoods and other species there. And this was a logging road along here, where more than 50 years ago, they came in, they cut the road, and they came in to log and take out big trees. And the national park has been removing roads. That's what this woman does. Has been removing roads. And you might think, well, that's easy to remove a road. In fact, removing a road is very difficult, and especially if you have a steep slope like this, because what you have to do is you have to pull the terrain back up onto the roadbed. You have to get machinery to pull it back up, and that causes a lot of damage to the stream, but it's temporary damage because you resuspend the sediment there. But this is actually a road that has been removed, and they are now planting it. They have planted it, and the vegetation will come up. The idea of a road effect zone is an idea that what this is. I work with transportation planners and engineers a lot. And the transportation planner that's planning a road does really good, careful, wonderful work in a very narrow zone, using nice equations and so on. And then there's some people like me who come along who would say, we need to think about the whole landscape, the water flowing, the wildlife, and things like that. And so how do you get those two perspectives together? And this road effect zone is the solution that we've come to that some of the engineers really like. And the idea is, here's a road, this is distance from the road, and you make a list of all the environmental factors that are important. And this is just a simple list of maybe 10 or 12, but there are 40 or 50 that I know. And you make that list, and then you say, well, how far out from that road is there a statistically significant effect? And you draw that. And so this road is having a significant effect at that distance for this variable here. And beyond it, it's not significant, and therefore it's not the responsibility of transportation. It's the responsibility of society or other things. And so what you do is you do this for these, and you remember a road is cutting through a mosaic. So you have fields and woods and different things. And so there are different variables, there's a mosaic, and there are three driving forces that determine this distance. And one is, of course, traffic is one, but upslope, downslope. And these are the things that are driven by gravity, the force of gravity. So, and these are water related. And then upwind, downwind, these are things that are related to temperature or wind differences. And then this has to do with the microtopography and the quality of habitat on different sides of the road. You drive a road, you're going to have a picnic, and you stop and you look. I don't like that side, I like this side. I have my picnic here. The animal does the same thing. It says, I like this, I don't like that. So when the road effect zone is simply a zone that goes like this around the road on both sides, in which there's a statistically significant environmental effect. And that's the responsibility then of transportation, working with ecologists and others. And beyond that, it's not transportation's responsibility. And we mapped that for an area near Boston. And then I want to show you, this is kind of nice. This is the Dutch study, the Netherlands. And here's taking the whole landscape. And it's many tens of kilometers across. Germany is over here. Amsterdam is up here. And what the Parliament said to the Ministry of Transport was to map the National Ecological Network. The National Ecological Network. And basically the National Ecological Network are the large green patches, what I call emeralds, because remember, women tell me that emeralds are the most valuable big green things. I don't know. But these are the large green emeralds, and then the lines are the major wildlife corridors or presumed wildlife corridors, and these are the water corridors here. And then Parliament said to the Ministry of Transport, superimpose on that the main road network. And that's what this is, the ecological network and the main road, the expressway network. And so they've got these here. And where there are conflict zones or bottlenecks, the conflicts are the circles. So that's where the ecological network and the main road network have conflicts. Conflicts on water and wildlife, various things. And then the Parliament says, here's some money. Eliminate 40% of those circles, those conflict zones, within 6 years. And they did it. They eliminated it. And some of the places are right here and here and here. This map, some of the places they did it. And so they went back to the Parliament and said, we did it. We would like more money. The Parliament gave them more money to eliminate the next 35% of the conflict zones within, I forget how many years, the next year. And so they were working on that. It's a very simple mechanism working with government and road ecology. And this is a similar example in Florida, with the one state in the United States where we do it rather well. This was based on a GIS model with 8 variables, things like rare species and riparian zones and bear roadkills and other things. And for every segment in the state of Florida, they did it. And then the government, the Florida Department of Transportation says, okay, we're going to spend money. We will put our money here and not put our money there, because we have more success per dollar or per mile of road, kilometer of road there. So it's a way of setting priorities there. Very simple GIS exercise. And keep going. The Dutch also are very interested in compensation. And the idea between ecological compensation is that if you have an environmental impact here of some kind, and you just can't mitigate it, it's too difficult to mitigate, there's no easy way to do it, that is to improve it, then get an equal amount of ecological value somewhere else and protect that. And we do that some places in our country, not too much, but a little bit. And so it's an interesting idea. It says that we can build highways anywhere, almost, and you have to good things and bad things here. A good thing is they're raising it up so the floodwaters can go across the floodplain and will not flood the highway. Also, the agriculture, they're trying to, some places, they're trying to protect farmland, because China has a lot of people and they know they need food, and they're running out of farmland in some areas. So this protects some farmland here. It would provide movement for wildlife, if there were wildlife. Not much wildlife in this area. Some of the bad things, however, is that they're going down the floodplain instead of putting it back behind the highway there. And they go for miles down this river, crossing back and forth, which I don't think is so good, but they argued for it. Oh yes, here we are. These are my friends 2 months ago. This is the big boss, Wen Lee, and this man is the chief dynamiter. He's the man who does the dynamite for this tunnel. And I was introduced with the chief dynamiter. I'm an ecologist, and that was a special event. At any rate, notice they're building a tunnel, and there's another tunnel over on this other side for the 2 lanes. And notice the gentle topography here. They're just low hills. This is not a big mountain, low hills. And they're trying to build the road so it's like a railroad. It's gradual curves and fairly flat. That's what their model is, really a railroad. It's very interesting. We don't do that. We go much farther up and down. And one of the reasons they do it, they don't want road cuts with erosion. They're trying to prevent road cuts. And so they will go through it. Even though they find that per kilometer, it's much more expensive to maintain these tunnels. That is, they had terrible problems with water, with rocks, with air, and with light in the tunnels. They know the maintenance is higher, but they had this idea of making the road fairly constant. So that's going under. This is in Florida. I mentioned that road right along here where those underpasses were made for the Florida panther and water. And this is what we're doing now, where in this area, this is Miami, city of Miami. And right here, we've started the process. This is what it looked like before. The park is down here, water flowing here, and we're raising the highway. We're raising it up so mainly for water flow into the park. And we've got the first mile started, and this is the first of 10 miles that are being raised up there to enhance water movement and, of course, the whole fauna through there. This is Barcelona. I just want to show you, here's a neighborhood on one side, a neighborhood on another side, a big highway was put through, and they're put through, and the neighbors didn't like being severed, being cut, and so they fought with the government for years, for 12 years, I think. And finally the government said, okay, we will reconnect you. And this is the park they built over the highway there to reconnect these two neighborhoods and give them some park space there. One point I want to make about roads is that they're really cultural artifacts. They're things out of our culture. Of course, we transport, and there's good theoretical reasons for roads, but also they reflect our transport. And somebody did this image, and it represents 4 European nations, and it kind of illustrates their culture in the roadside. So here's England, and here's France, here's the Netherlands, and here's Italy there. And those countries can immediately say, oh yes, of course, this is France, this is France, this is Italy. Next. So, road ecology, what lies ahead? That's for you and here to tell us and to work with us. Next one. And I end with this, to say this is kind of the way I see the world. Mold the land so both nature and people thrive long term. And long term to me means over several decades or human generations. That's the time scale. Remember, the road system is in place, and the same roads will be there 30 years from now and probably 50 years or more. So there's a lot of inertia. We have 250 million vehicles using our road system. It's crazy. But the Chinese actually are buying and building roads faster than we are, and buying cars and building roads. And so this is transportation. It has a lot of inertia. And so a lot of what we do is mitigation, to minimize the environmental impact of it. But also we must plan ahead. And so we must plan so that nature, environment, nature has a good future. And you remember how I started with that image of getting a road network that works with the big patches of nature. And those are connected. And how do you mix those? How do you superimpose those in an intelligent way? And so that's my goal, and I thank you very much. Close.
Sim, na minha Isso aqui ele vai falar português. Ok. Então, começando com algumas perguntas das alunas, se não me engano, da Ecologia de Estradas aqui mesmo. Quando ele faz a pergunta que você escreveu, se apresenta, né? Piso da mão, alguma coisa assim, tá? Aqui mesmo, eu sei.
A ideia é só para ele saber com quem ele está falando, então eu faço a pergunta, como não tem nome, a não ser, acho que essas 3 primeiras que são da Larissa. A gente pode fazer 3 de uma vez. 3 questions and answers. Alright. Tá. Quais os desafios para trabalhar com ecologia de estrada, né? A Larissa, aqui está.
E quem fez essa pergunta?
Larissa.
I like a question that's very simple and small.
No, yeah,
The girls in the back with face teachers, I know it was.
Okay, good.
and Richard, the three questions is from Larissa. I don't know if maybe.
That's all right.
All right, okay.
I think some of the big challenges we have are, first of all, working well with the ecologists, working well with the transportation community. In our country, we have established a group. It's called the International Conference on Ecology and Transportation. You can go online, EcoET. And we started it in 1995, and we have meetings every 2 years. You are welcome to come. It's international. And it's a very interesting meeting because it has academics, it has national park and national forests and state parks and so on, fisheries and so forth. But it has the transportation community from each state represented. And they include some of the more senior engineers and planners, but it includes a lot of younger dynamic ecologists and aquatic biologists and landscape architects, people who are interested in the environment. And so you meet a lot of people, a lot of interaction among the people that are actually doing things on the ground. So that's one thing. Get something going that stimulates interaction with the people in the state governments and other government agencies with environmental, and we welcome everybody. The meetings are usually about 500 people. They're really interesting meetings every 2 years. That's one thing. The second thing I would say is what I said up here, is that we can improve the edge of our roads everywhere in different ways. So one place you're going to minimize fragmentation. Another place you're going to have cleaner stormwater because you make a retention basin where you retain the heavy metals and the other pollutants there. Some of them are treated in a sense microbial decomposition and other things. And we can do that. And it doesn't take a lot of space in most cases. Then the third thing is looking to the future, the big picture. I think that idea of a connected emerald network, the Dutch's National Ecological Network, that idea is a very powerful idea because in a sense it's providing for the future. It's providing for your children and my children and other people's children. Say, yes, we are going to have those animals and those plants and that clean water. And so I think that's the other great challenge there. Thank you.
A segunda é qual a importância dos países do em desenvolvimento na evolução da ciência de ecologia de estrada, principalmente no Brasil, no caso emergente, agora um país emergente.
So what's the importance of developing countries specifically on the evolution of road ecology science? And maybe speak a little bit about Brazil as an emerging economy.
Quem fez a pergunta? Está presente? Não? Tá.
So this comes from the whole road ecology.
Another hard question. The first thing I have to say that I don't know whether I consider Brazil a developing country. To say that. I think that Brazil is one of the great countries of the world. And so if that's true, then I want to learn from you. And we want to learn from you. And we want to see the products of this Road Ecology Conference and the many to follow. And we need to learn from you. And let me give you a human example. We have a small island near in the Caribbean, south of Florida, called Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico is a very small place. It's really nice. I like it. And And so so there's a national forest there, and there are some roads that go into this national forest. Okay. And how do people use public spaces, in this case a national forest, with roads? It's very interesting that when you go there on weekends, for example, people will have a whole lot of people will get in a car, 2 cars, and they'll come out, and they'll go out, and they want a place where they can have a picnic. They want a place where they can cook food. The grandmother's there, the parents are there, the brothers and sisters are there, the children are there. And so there are 3 generations there. And they want a place that they can kick their ball. They must have a place to kick the ball. So they're using public space in a very creative way. And they also want to walk a little bit, and they want to be near other people. They don't want just one little place way off. But they like the social interactions of having other families doing the thing. And I use this example because we don't have designs for that kind of public space use in our literature. And I don't know whether that describes some aspect of Brazilian culture and practice or not. But I will simply say that's an example of something where in the literature of road ecology and of landscape ecology and of natural resource protection and forest protection, we don't provide anything in our literature for that, in our thinking. And yet that's the way that people want it to be. And so, first thing I'd say is I think of Brazil as being a big, strong, powerful country. It's growing wonderfully in some ways. Maybe it's not doing so well in protecting the environment. In fact, maybe in places it's doing very badly in that. But that's true in all countries. And I say that I want to learn from you. That is, we look for your publications to see. I saw things this morning, for example, of animals in rainforests. Well, we need to know that. We don't have a lot of good literature on the effects of animals and roads and rainforests. Brazil is the epicenter of that worldwide. And so we need to learn from you on fragmentation patterns and Amazonas and so forth. So maybe those are obvious things. Maybe you all knew those things, but I think that arboreal crossings of animals is something that we need to learn from you also.
Temos aqui uma pergunta que a gente vai tentar até juntar porque elas são afins. O Alex Baja perguntou: no Brasil, os sistemas para mitigar impactos de atropelamento são pensados para proteger muitas espécies. Normalmente, sistemas em outros países são focados em uma ou poucas espécies, né? Na sua experiência, sistemas como o brasileiro são eficientes? Aí entra, eu acho que tem a ver até falar um pouco em países com mega diversidade, como o Brasil, se discute a criação de túneis e passagens de fauna utilizadas por múltiplas espécies. Muita crítica a respeito disso. Qual a sua opinião sobre isso? Just apart and the lane, the strips along the lane, you example in China, sometimes it can make a trap for animals, and sometimes it's good. And just make a comment about that.
If I say that we need this, the goal is to have an emerald network with large natural areas that are connected. an oversimplification, but a general model. If that's a major goal, and I and many people here could describe the advantages of that. There are many advantages from CO2 to large animals, etc. If that's the goal, then, and if you say all the rest of the world, we don't care, ecologically, then we will not protect all the species. We will protect, I think we will protect the bulk of the species, I don't know, 90%, I don't know, it's 80%, 90% more. I think that design is the best design we have come up with now. Now you can say, all right, we need more, we need to do better, and we can do better. And I can name the next 2 or 3 variables that I would add to get more species protected. But let me just make this model simple and say large green patches that are connected is the goal. Now, if I say that we protect the bulk of the species, that means we don't protect some species. I'm saying some species can go, bye-bye. You can go extinct, that's okay. Now, clearly, many conservation biologists would not agree with that. We must protect every species on Earth. I work with the development. I work with the transportation community. I've written a book on urban regions. I'm writing a book now on urban ecology. And I say if you try to protect every species on Earth, that's great theoretically, but I use the metaphor in my classes. I say the bulldozer is running. You know a bulldozer? What's a bulldozer? The machine is going, the bulldozer is running. And so if the government comes to you and said, will you please make a plan for this to protect nature? And you say, a biologist like me says, oh, well, we don't have data. Give us some money. We will study it for 2 years. Well, the bulldozer is running, and in 2 years there is no nature. It's gone. So I think you have to think about, and I gave a talk in Rio de Janeiro on urban regions, urban ecology at the University Federal. And I have statistics there about the urbanization rates in the world, you know, and I don't want to give those, you know, some of them from the United Nations. So what I'm really saying is that anything we do, mitigation in road ecology, has to be in the context of we have 6 billion people on Earth today, and soon, tomorrow, we will have 8 billion or more. And where will those people be? 2 billion of them, 1.5 billion maybe, will be urban people, but especially in the outskirts, especially the smaller cities will grow, and transportation is expanding. So I think any answer you give, theoretically, yes, I'd like to protect every species. In the real world, that's impossible, I think. So making a decision, I like the Brazilian approach of designing underpasses and overpasses for multiple species. To me, that's the way to go. I don't think designing it for one species and hoping the others will go is the way to go. And so that's what, and I forget the second part of the question.
What's your opinion about vegetation strips?
Oh, yes, yes. 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 When I started in landscape ecology many years ago, the question was the edges of forest edges. And there's a good literature from wildlife biology in the 1960s and 70s and 80s that conclude that edges are bad. Earlier literature says edges are good. Forest edges are good because most game species, that is the species you shoot for food, most of them are favored by forest edges, by the edges, shrubbies there. So early on, the edges are good. And then we became more interested in rare species and interior species, and we decided that edges are bad. And so the literature from conservation biology and other places conclude that edges are mostly bad. And so I actually think that that they're good and bad things, but I think on the balance, dense edge vegetation is better than not dense vegetation. You increase the population size there, and if it's dense, you probably can outcompete some non-native species if you don't like non-native species. So taking that to roads, if you take your highways and you have a big open area along the road like this, and you keep mowing it and keeping it open, then you favor the disturbance of non-native species. You reduce the woody habitat that are present for wildlife, and you make a bigger barrier. It's harder to get across the road. So I like having more woody vegetation along many, not all, but many roadsides. And what that does is it reduces the barrier effect of the road. Not all species like it. Remember, if we lose some species to extinction, I'm not going to, I think that's natural. I know this, I don't want to say that. It is natural, but we are accelerating the loss. That's right. We are accelerating. So I think the trade-off is, the balance is better to have more woody vegetation along the edge of the road. Now, let me tell you another thing. If you have an open area in the forest there, then the edge effect, so to speak, the degraded effect, would start there in the forest and go in. If you cover this with small trees and dense shrubs, then that degradation part in the forest will come back this way more. You will have less degraded habitat. So it's also a way of helping to protect the forest habitat beyond there. At least theoretically. I can't cite you good studies for that, but I feel confident that the studies will eventually show that. So on balance, I'm willing to have more road-killed animals. That's okay with me. We can increase the road-killed animals as long as we increase the amount of habitat here. And remember, the road-killed animals, almost all of them are, I don't know in Brazil, but they are the common weedy species. They are the house cats and all the little animals there that can make babies faster than we can hit them with cars.
Like capybaras.
Capybara.
So, in the same way, we have another question. Vou falar agora para, eu não sei quem fez a pergunta. Qual a experiência, a sua experiência na utilização de telamento alambrado ao longo de rodovias, servindo como barreiras de indução de animais para a utilização das passagens de fauna?
So another polemic-based mitigation question. So sometimes people put fences that parallel the roadways to prevent crossings at all. What are your thoughts on that? Is it good or evil?
The fences along the road that have been built relative to underpasses and overpasses are put there in order that the animals cannot cross somewhere nearby, but it's to help force the animals to go over or under. So the fences near underpasses and overpasses are probably necessary, at least initially, for the short term. It turns out that animals learn very fast. You can correct me. But the data from Canada, the best data set in the world, in Banff National Park, show that when they built overpasses and underpasses, that, well, let me just say the two big overpasses in Banff National Park in Canada, they were surprised that in the first 2 years, all the species of mammals crossed All the species of mid-sized and large mammals crossed those over within 2 years. And the only animal that didn't was actually the female grizzly bear. And she didn't cross. She had a smaller territory and she stayed. But she started to cross in the 4th year. And so if you take a 10-year or 30-year time horizon of perspective, then those animals learn very fast that it's safe to cross. And so I think putting the fences up, at least initially, until the animals learn where these nice safe places are, makes good sense. Now, there's a big criticism of those studies in Banff National Park, Canada. At least it used to be. The people who criticized, we don't hear from them recently. And they said that the putting a fence up for many kilometers there has changed the entire behavioral patterns of all the animals. All the species patterns have been changed by that fence. Not the highway. The highway was there before. And the point is that they can't cross the fence. So if you have a home range, which includes both sides of the highway, you can no longer get to half of your home, or part of your home range there. And they've also caused a lot of species interactions close to the fence. You know, predators getting herbivores to eat. And so the critics will say that fence was really the bad thing. You made overpasses, that's fine, but those aren't so important. The big thing is the entire farm, the patterns of behavior, of foraging movements, of seasonal migration movements have been changed by those fences. Today, most of us don't agree with that. But I want you to know that that's an alternative hypothesis, and it's related to this. The question of fences anywhere that is not related to underpasses and overpasses, most fences are permeable. Animals are smart. They dig under, they climb over, they make holes. And transportation budgets usually do not have much money for maintenance. So a tree falls down the fence, and maybe 3 months goes by before that fence is fixed. Animals go back and forth. So genetically, the animals can get across there. If transportation priorities and budgets fixed fences all the time, then they could be really big barriers, but they don't. All the fences I've seen become permeable very quickly.
This will be our last question.
Yeah. Before I say the last question, I just want to say great to your lecture, and just comment that in Brazil you have a popular phrase, thinking that say, home sense don't make miracles. E no Brasil, santo de casa não faz milagre. And then hope with your words, foreign sense, saying something, hearing from you, you can change things here. Porque no Brasil a gente fala bastante, muitas coisas, e a gente vendo o Forman repetindo coisas e falando experiências do mundo para que a gente possa incorporar a nossa política e mudar alguma coisa aqui para ver se o santo estrangeiro faz algum milagre aqui nessa terra. Que seja muito bem-vindo. Enfim, até premiando esse pensamento aí, é uma pergunta que fala como que a ecologia... Alô? Como a ecologia de estrada, a teoria, tem sido incorporada pelo governo norte-americano nas suas políticas de transporte, Ministério dos Transportes e tal, o correspondente, e se ela tem sido, de que forma ela tem sido incorporada, e como você recomenda que o Brasil possa fazer isso no mesmo sentido, de incorporar essa teoria na política de transporte do país. Obrigado.
So, has the academic
the answer to the first question is yes. That academic road ecology has had a significant impact in the transportation community and on the ground, that is transportation, land, and people. That's the first answer. The second part of that answer is at a very slow rate. At a very low rate. And, but you have to understand, I wish I knew how many people here work for government in transportation in Brazil. You have to understand that transportation is central to society. I mean, it's absolutely central to society. It permits us to have people, to have access to resources, to having dinner, for social interactions. It's also absolutely central to industry and commercial development and the economy. I mean, so just think about it. If all the roads were wagon roads here, what the economy of Brazil would be like, or America would be like. So I think it's very important to realize that in working with transportation, we're working with a central facet of society, of the world. And if we don't remember that, then I think quickly we will be forgotten. So, having said that, then I will add that our road system was largely in place 100 years ago in America. Most of our road system was there. That is, we have 6.25 million kilometers of road in America. It's crazy all over. That's not crazy, but it exists. It exists. And probably 85% was there in 1910, 100 years ago. So our road system is there. And Earth Day, or the rise of modern ecology in the 1970s, the road system was there long before the rise of modern ecology, what we do. And so what we're doing mainly is mitigation. We're trying to minimize, so the road system is built before ecology. And engineers built roads. And they built them to get the theoretical, one of the theoretical reasons for a road is efficiency of getting people or goods from here to there. It's the most efficient way to do it, to go on a road. The second theoretical reason was not so important in the building, and that is to protect the surroundings. If you go from here to there, you protect the surroundings. You don't have a random walk, a random road going like this. So we're mitigating, basically. We're mitigating and minimizing the environmental effects of roads. That's what we're doing today. I went to China because China is building a new road system. And I don't know the status in Brazil. I want to learn. Believe it or not, next month, I'm going to give a talk on road ecology in Brazil and China. So I must learn from you. I come to learn. At any rate, so we're mitigating. So I mentioned that international conference on ecology and transportation, ECOWIN. And that was a way that academics, that is wildlife biologists, landscape ecologists, aquatic biologists, landscape architects, the whole range of environmental air pollution, water pollution experts began to work with transportation engineers and transportation planners. Those are the people you want to work with. And when I was studying in the university, engineers were the enemy. I mean, you know, they had all these linear thinking, and all the dots were right along the line, and I was dealing with big scatters of ecological point. But now I've worked with engineers, and I really like working with engineers. And one reason is they are can-do people. In other words, tell me the problem, give me the main variables, we can do that. The biologist says, oh, give me some money, I will study it, and then give you some results. The engineer says, yes, tell me what the problem is, and we will do it. I kind of like that. So the working then at the mid and lower levels of the state transportation agencies and the federal transportation agencies and the national forests, national parks, and levels like that, it has given me a lot of optimism. So yes, we have made progress. There are underpasses and overpasses being built today in perhaps 1/3 or maybe 1/2 of our state. Certainly they're on plans for most of our states. They're probably being built in 1/3 of our states. When we started road ecology in about 1995, with wildlife biologists and others, there were three overpasses, wildlife overpasses in America, and there were 3 in Canada. And that number has doubled or tripled now. And Europe's numbers also have grown a lot in the last 15 years. I said yes to and I also said, but at a very slow rate. And so now, 15 years after the beginning, at least when I was active with it, the beginning, I feel that the good thing is that it now has become sort of mainstream. It's just beginning to become mainstream. Maybe that's a better statement. It's just beginning to become normal for the State Department of Transportation of X and Y to say, oh, here's a road, we must build an overpass. That would have been radical. That would have been crazy thinking 10 years ago. Now, yes, we can do that. They do it in Montana, they do it in Florida, they do it in Utah, etc. So now it's become mainstream, but population growth is going faster. The bulldozer is running, goes faster. Urbanization, sprawl in our country is going faster. So, while yes, I think the answer is yes, I think the rate is too slow. And that's why now I told you I was writing this kind of radical paper with an automotive engineer, Dan Sperling it's not a radical paper, it's very logical. It's just pushing the envelope for having some kind of a road system which doesn't have cars everywhere, and engines and fossil fuel use and greenhouse gases and things like that. But still, remember the goal of transportation is safe and efficient mobility of people and goods. Safe and efficient mobility or accessibility of people and goods. And I would add a secondary, and that is without disrupting natural systems there, patterns and processes. So I mean, we're at the stage, I think, now of not only getting these ideas into the mainstream, but also taking the next step. What could a future be? I mean, you know, I was with a transportation planner from Sao Paulo. Is anybody from Sao Paulo here? Well, I was with the last few days. I was with a transportation planner, Ronaldo. Nice name. Soccer football player. No, and he said that at any rush hour in the morning or in the afternoon, Sao Paulo, on the expressways, only on the expressways, there's about 100 kilometers of traffic jam. 100 kilometers of traffic jam every morning, every afternoon. 100, and it reaches more than 250 the worst times, with maybe 40 accidents or 50 accidents on the expressway. So we're going too slowly. We must go faster. We must be stronger. But still, we must work with the transportation community. They are can-do people, and society is looking for solutions. So it's a very exciting frontier, and I want to learn from everybody in this room. Thank you.
So we just wanted to thank you very much for this morning. And we lied to you. We have one more quick question. I promise you can go to lunch soon. This can be a one-word answer, which makes it even harder. But we up here were wondering if you could, in a word or a sentence, say what in your mind now is the single most important thing in road ecology that no one is talking about, that we should keep in the back of our minds for the rest of this conference.
O que a gente bolou, não sei se todo mundo entendeu, é que para finalizar uma sugestão, uma recomendação, que qual seria o ponto mais importante e direto que a respeito da ecologia de estradas, que ninguém tem falado muito o suficiente e que deveria ser levado em consideração durante o resto da conferência, nas mesas redondas. Então, uma recomendação, uma coisa, já agradecendo o Richard e a todos aqui. Obrigado.
There are two big areas of rescue. One big area is the largest rainforest in the world that is unfragmented, largely unfragmented. I show in my talk in Rio, I showed a map of the unfragmented areas of the world. And there are only about 6 big ones, and the Amazon is one of them. And so at one level, I would say, simply do whatever you can to protect those resources, understanding that there's a great nation here. And the great nation is great because of its people, and also its economy is very relevant, and it's in the world, in the world's perspective. And so, stopping all roads, that's fine. Do that. But I think there's another way to go that has a higher probability of success, and that is working with the transportation community to find intelligent places for the roads, knowing that there's population growth and development there. Where we put our roads, the best places and the worst places, to me, is the issue, the most promising issue. And then at the other scale is the urbanization issue. 100 kilometers of traffic jams every morning and every afternoon, or trying to get across a mega city. But knowing that today we have just become Homo sapiens urbanus in the last 2 years. More than 50% of us live in built areas, lives in urban areas. The United Nations stated we have just become an urban species, and there are 3 billion of us that live in urban cities, and in 30 years there will be 5 billion urban people. The rural population will stay constant for the next 30 years. The urban population goes from 3 billion to 5 billion. Wow, think about that. Think about cars. Think about nature. Think about the environment. One of the things we were doing outside of Rio, the north of Rio, we go from that big, bay where the ships come in and the heavy metals, the mineral transport to the other parts of the world, China and other places. And then going across north of Rio to the other big bay over here, where there's a huge petrochemical plant to be built. Gas, the federal government has approved it, and all the chemical industries will join it. So all of a sudden, Rio used to be a city down here,
with some small towns and cities out there, all of a sudden there would be a massive arc of development. From this petrochemical area by this bag, all the way across to there, but it will be all development in commercial and industrial. Rio de Janeiro's region is going to change dramatically. And that process is being repeated in Chinese cities and other cities around the world. So I think that's the second thing, is thinking about the area. What do you do outside of cities that are growing, and we know they're growing, and to make the environment better? So that's the second thing. The Amazon is outside of cities. Thank you.